Welcome to Lighting the Way Today, a place where we discuss how to connect God's Word with topics relevant to everyday life. We hope this conversation encourages, enlightens, and inspires you. Enjoy this episode.
Well, welcome everybody to the Lighting the Way Today podcast. I am Hunter Mullins, and with me today is Sierra Bergman. Hello, Sierra.
Hello, Hunter, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on today's episode. Today is going to be a lot of fun. We are going to hear from two artists, Clem Robbins and Sydney Spevak. Our wonderful Heather Malinowski hosts a great interview with them where we get to learn more about what it is that they do when it comes to art, how art has helped them get closer to God and His Word. And if you stick towards the end of the episode, we also get to learn about some art that they have produced for our ministry. It's a really great conversation. So whether you're somebody who is an artist and you might be looking to see how you can do things for God with art, or perhaps you're somebody who just enjoys and appreciates the beauty of art, this is an episode that will leave you feeling uplifted, as well as being able to just, take a look outside and see the beautiful creation that God has made and see, He is an artist too.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I can't wait to hear it, so we're just going to jump right on in.
Well, hello. My name's Heather Malinowski, and I have the privilege to sit with two amazing people today and have a very unique conversation. I have Clem Robbins and I have Sydney Spevak here with me today, and we're going to talk about God and our passion, and that passion is art. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. And in terms of having Clem and Sydney here, they're going to bring some unique stuff to the table into this conversation, and I am so excited. So let me tell you a little bit about our guests and let them say a little bit too. So we have Clem here, who since the 70s, this is a really fun fact, and I love telling people about this myself. Clem has been working in comics since 1977. That's pretty dope. That's pretty amazing. But he doesn't just work in comics. He also, and in comics, he does lettering work and art. Is that correct for the comics?
I inked one comic.
You inked one comic.
It took forever. And there was a Batman story where the artist left a figure out of the panel. And the figure had a speech. So I called the artist and said, I draw pretty well. Do you mind if I draw him in for you? He said, fine. So he was one of Mr. Freeze's henchmen. His name was Frosty.
I like Batman. Clem also studied at the Art Student League of New York, and over the past 30 years, he's gotten coaching from neoclassicist painters, and his paintings and drawings are in permanent collections of the Way International and in the Cincinnati Art Museum as well. So that is quite the impressive resume, portfolio, one of those things, your life. It's an impressive life. Would you like to say hi to our listeners, Clem?
Hi, everybody.
Anything you would like to add to that about what it is that you've done with art?
I used to teach at the Art Academy of Cincinnati. I taught figure drawing and human anatomy. I wrote a book. It was published about 20 years ago on drawing the figure. It's out of print. I don't believe anything I wrote in it anymore, but the pictures are good.
That's really neat. And I like that. I like that because you're like, I don't necessarily believe what I wrote in it anymore, but that's because I believe as artists, we get the opportunity to continue to grow in our art and learn more.
Well, some of the people that I studied with in New York taught some stuff that I no longer believe.
Gotcha.
And some of the people, these neoclassicists I've palled around with for the last few years, they kind of set me straight on some things. So if that book was republished, I'd take out a few chapters.
Nice.
But it was the best I could.
Nice. Best you can with what you know at the time. I like that. And then we have Sydney. Hi, Sydney.
Hi.
And Sydney is a graduate of St. Francis in Fort Wayne, where she studied fine art.
Mm-hmm.
And then she also was accepted into a grad school in Nashville for fine art as well.
Yeah.
And that's where she really got into mural painting.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about your mural work?
Yes. So actually, after I had graduated from St. Francis, received my bachelor's degree in fine art, it was a dream of mine to get accepted and to go to grad school. And so I ended up moving down to Nashville and started the first semester there, and then ended up coming back home for a lot of different reasons. But that was a very challenging time in my life. And that was when I had connected with a mural artist who I'd reached out to a year before. And I asked her if she had anything that was available, anything that I could help her with. And she's one of the most beautiful women ever. She's incredible. Her name's Amy Books. And so we just went to town around different cities in the surrounding Fort Wayne area in Indiana, and just started building a relationship with each other as my mentor for murals. And then, we just did these huge murals, and one was a bald eagle with the American flag on one side and the Indiana flag on another, with a seal in the middle. Very in-depth work, but it was a huge learning process, and she just took everything in stride, which I really appreciated. There was nothing that you couldn't ask her, and she had that, she had a Christian foundation, which really helped us just bond even more, because we knew that we had that in common as well.
That's really cool. Well, so that gave me a little bit of your artistic background. So this is going to be a very broad next question, and I'm just going to put it on the table for you guys to talk about. But why art? Why art? Why not? I like
Touché, Clem.
As somebody I'm not a painter. I have a background in photography, which to me I consider a minor art, because it doesn't take the same type of skill set and dedication to study. It still takes a lot to study and to get it right, but it's not the same. Mm-hmm. So I look at people like you and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did you even get into this? Because this is not just like a hobby.
Right.
This is I like to call it a professional passion, because it's not just a profession. It's in you guys watching you talk about this. So again, I say, why art?
You'd have to understand the family I grew up in. My father was a very brilliant man. He was one of the most important designers of the 20th century, and he was a very good painter. It just seemed inevitable. That's all.
That's interesting, because you've turned it into something way more than just happenstance, I guess.
My dad's father, my grandfather, he went to the Chicago Institute of Art, mm-hmm. and Dad already had that in him when he was growing up. I've seen some of my father's past sketches, and he would always put little sketches in our lunch boxes when we would go to school.
John!
Hey, Dad! And I think that's probably, if I can pinpoint a source, that would probably be where I started recognizing things. I will agree with Clem and say that it does feel somewhat inevitable, because it's just something you keep coming back to, and you may not even realize that you have such a desire to keep drawing or to keep painting, but it's something that is somewhat within you because of both Clem and I's backgrounds. There's that has to do with it, of course, but a lot of it is just recognizing that it's right there in front of you and that you keep coming back to it. I couldn't stick with anything when I was younger. I tried everything and nothing stuck. Morgan, my sister, found her passion for music at such a young age, and I felt like I couldn't get anything right. But then I realized I had been drawing the whole time, and I had just had to go back and really realize that.
And Clem, you mentioned in terms of your father's accomplishments, but when did you start seeing that in your own life?
Oh, I don't know. They always had pads for us to play with pretty early on. I got interested in comic books when I was 9. They tried to keep me away from them, but I really liked it. I started making my own.
That's neat. That goes back to Sydney's comment about how you just kind of keep coming back to it. So when it comes to the art that you have produced, we've gone from what got you started into art, which I really love the familial connection. My mom is an artist too, in her own right. That was her passion as well growing up. And my grandfather was a photographer in the Korean War for the Marines. So, I'm like, hey, this sounds kind of familiar. I like this. But in terms of your favorite, I know this is kind of hard to distill down, but what is your favorite piece of work you've ever done? I know. You can't see. So I'm just like, did movements with his hands. Like, Heather, you can't ask that kind of question.
Of course you can ask that.
But I did. I asked it.
I was commissioned to do kind of a major project and put a lot of time and effort into it and solve a lot of problems. If for nothing else than for the problems that I solved, I was very systematic in planning how I was going to do it. The plans turned out to be good ones. There were very few problems with it, and some people have liked it. So I would have to say that particular one is my favorite. It's a great experience.
You mentioned something interesting. You mentioned like the planning and the linear progression. And I have to say, as somebody who's been involved in the art world and who knows quite a few artists, sometimes you don't get the rap of being good planners, of being, progression followers, I guess we'll call that. It's more kind of like up there in the air, and it can be kind of
There's a place for that.
Mm-hmm.
And really, when a brush is in your hands and you're making marks, it has to be pretty spontaneous. But there's a lot of preparation for that moment when you have that brush in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Like intentional spontaneity.
That's a good way to put it. The picture involved Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
It took a great deal to find a face for Jesus Christ that I liked. Hundreds of hours, actually, just searching on Google Middle Eastern faces. Things like that.
I like that, Sid, you called it, say it one more time.
Intentional spontaneity.
Intentional spontaneity. Have you seen that in your work?
I have. When you asked that, I felt a little bit of panic because it's like trying to choose, and for me, it's like trying to choose a favorite story or memory. Mm-hmm. So one of them is probably a piece that I did in college. I would say it was my end of my junior year, going into my senior year. And I felt like this piece was the turning point to my style and to the themes that I wanted to work with. I felt like I had finally found what all the professors were saying. You'll get there, you'll find your own style, you just got to be patient. I felt like this piece, I was like, oh, there it is. And it was this 16 by 20, not even very big. And it was a photo that I had taken, and I implemented it into like a representational, somewhat fragmented style, but it was more representational than anything. And it was this, I wanted to represent this domestic mom holding her baby as she's looking out the screen door, and it's from like a few doorways back. Your viewpoint is from a few doorways back, and it has the laundry basket on the floor, and everything that is on either side of the painting draws you into that moment of the mom with the baby looking out the window. And it sounds like quite plain, but it really gave me a direction towards the, like I said, the themes that I really wanted to pinpoint, like memory and like a stillness that comes with the painting where you can just stop. Because I just want people to like be able to process and deliberate within their own mind when they stand in front of pieces of mine. So yeah, just a little bit about that one. That's probably one of the favorites, but I have so many.
I like that, in terms of talking about the intentional spontaneity. Did I say that right?
Yes.
In Psalm 19, verse 1, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." And my mom used to always talk to me about that in terms of how God is the ultimate artist.
Yes.
Because not everything is straight lines, and not everything is, which there's nothing wrong with straight lines. But it's not all this cubed out, bricked out stuff. There's so much, like, it looks like spontaneity in what God has designed for us to view and to look at. You look at leaves on a tree, how the colors change. You look at the stars and how they're splattered across our vision. It's not just a mistake. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a position. Everything has a place. And that concept between the two of you really resonates with me. And God being the ultimate artist, we have the opportunity to bring people back to him through these different avenues, through these different passions that we have. So I'm going to put another one here out for you guys. You guys pick how you want to talk about it. But can you explain to me in your own words what it means to keep God first?
I was thinking about this one a lot, and it took me a little while to kind of wrap my head around it. I always talk to God and say, "God, I really need you to lead my hand right now, because I do not know what the next step, what the next stroke should be." And when you're doing that from a place that you know is genuine, you're like, I'm doing this for myself so that I can get better, but it's also so that other people can see the light within this, whatever it is, however they take it, they're going to know that there's something different about this. So I think that is how I tried to keep God at the forefront, just like really including him in the placement of strokes and just trusting him that whatever is in me and whatever God, the gifts and the talents and the work that God has given me is just going to push through to what piece I'm working on.
A couple of things have helped me. One of them is I made up my mind early on that I was going to learn to really dig reading the Bible. And I've followed through on that. And it is very entertaining. There are a lot of different ways to study it. Sometimes I'll get a question and I will devote a lot of time to answering it. There's one thing I remember studying for 15 years before I understood it, and I think I understand it very well now. It is a whale of a good time. It is my primary entertainment. So that's one thing. It's easy to keep God first if he entertains you like that. The other thing is service. Service kind of keeps you out of trouble. If you devote a portion of your life to serving others, that's a portion of your life that you're not going to be getting into mischief. It's a good way to go. So those two things, service and learning to enjoy the Bible, that's helped me.
How do you do that as an artist? How do you put those two things together?
When I was just starting out in comics, 21 years old, I was living in New York. I was starving. And I was, at that time, all the publishers except one were in Manhattan. So I was showing my portfolio all around, waiting for the phone to ring. Finally, a company called Gold Key called and said, we'd like to try you out. So I started doing stuff for Gold Key, and they handled licensed material like Tarzan and all the Looney Tunes characters. So it was fun. I was learning. After about a month of it, I got a story in which Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Yosemite Sam, and some others had a seance, and they called up a spirit, and the spirit led them to some money, and the story ends with them playing cards with the spirit. I got this. I got it on a Friday. Gold Key closed after I picked it up. I looked at this thing, and I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
This was for little kids watching a seance. I couldn't do it. So I agonized over it. And Monday I brought in the unlettered story and said, I can't do this. I'm sorry. And so they fired me. They told me it was unprofessional, which it was. And suddenly I was starving again for a week. And that was when DC Comics called me. And I've retained a very nice relationship with DC ever since. Known a lot of great people, worked on a lot of great projects. So you can think of that as an example of keeping God
Absolutely.
That, I mean, you're talking about like digging your heels in. I appreciate that you recognize, you're like, yes, this in the industry was not professional, but it's something you weren't willing to give on.
Yeah.
And how long had you been looking for a job again when you originally got to Manhattan?
It took months.
It took months. Okay, so you had this job at Golden Key, and then you didn't, and then a week went by, and you had something that essentially set you up to get into this industry for the rest of your time.
And for 47 years, I've had a wonderful time. Known a lot of great people, worked on a lot of great projects. Unfortunately, you can't say the same thing for Gold Key. They went bankrupt 4 years later. So that's my story.
That is a great history lesson in the importance of keeping God first.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's really awesome. In light of that, sharing that perspective with what you didn't want to do for children because you recognized it was aimed towards children and you're just not jiving with this. So art can have an impact. Like, that is art. Art can have an impact on, kids. It can lead them one way or the other, either thinking seances are a cool thing or not. So obviously you believe that art can bring you closer to God or potentially further away from him, correct?
Yeah. Anything a person does can do that. Our whole lives do that.
I do love this quote from Vincent van Gogh, or Vincent van Gogh, as he was, as his name is actually pronounced, fun fact. It's an unfamiliar quote, I think, to most people, but I think it's from, most of his quotes come from his letters to his brother Theo. And this one says, try to grasp the essence of what the great artists, the serious masters, say in their masterpieces, and you will again find God in them. One man has written or said it in a book, another in a painting. And I don't even, during, when Vincent van Gogh was alive, he wasn't popular. So saying that, I don't know if he included himself in that, but he already knew that at the depth of these pieces or in these books, like if you seriously try to get to the source or the essence of it, not saying for all, but he could tell that at the very core of it, you'll find God. And so I think whether people see it when they're standing in front of a piece that may or may not depict something biblical, whether they see it then or a year later, I'm trusting that they will make that connection. And then once they do see or get to know God better, maybe then they'll, whenever they see pieces on walls or artists working on things, they'll be able to separate the two. They'll be able to see, oh, I didn't see this a year ago when I looked at this same thing, but now I can understand, hey, I think this has got a sort of stillness to it, which then allows God to work. Because when you're still, then you hear his still small voice. I think the stillness and the deliberation really, that opens up the space for God to be there between that person and the painting. That's just my take.
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate between, Clem, what you shared, and Sydney, what you shared, in terms of that it's not as what is the word? Tangible might not be the right word, but it's not as exacting.
Right.
We'll put it that way. Music hits you immediately, and it hits memory centers of your brain. When you're reading, it's very easy to describe. The author can use as many words as they want to describe a very specific color of orange, and they can elicit a response based on the words that they use around it, when your art may have a brush stroke.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is that brush stroke? So I appreciate you guys sharing that, because that is a unique way to look at that. But also in terms of knowing that it can have that impact. Because have either of you had work do that for you? Have you ever looked at a piece of art or maybe art that you've done and had it be like, whoa?
My favorite picture of Jesus Christ of all time is by the French romantic painter Delacroix, who was an agnostic. But he painted a picture of Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. And you're nodding,
Yes,
the picture?
Yes.
He's sitting there. It is very, very intense. And two angels are trying to help him. And he's shooing them away. He's holding them back. And they're crying because they can't help him. Delacroix may not have believed, but it's a marvelous depiction of the greatest act of self-sacrifice ever committed by a human being. And that one thrilled me to the core.
It's that emotional connection that you're talking about.
Rembrandt understood Jesus Christ. You look at especially his later pictures, there's one, just a little portrait of him, and he's got this little crooked smile on his face. Not only do you get a sense this was a man without sin, you also got a sense that the man that painted it loved the guy.
I don't think I've seen that one. I know the Delacroix one that you're talking about, but I haven't seen the Rembrandt. I'll have to look it up.
I remember the painting that Rembrandt did of the prodigal son, and how he's just falling at his father's feet, and his father's just embracing him, and it's done in such a beautiful and interesting way. Like, you can tell the emotion of that. And pieces like that's how you know those artists were very educated on the pieces that they were doing, because they could push that piece in such a way that they're like, I know that this is gonna hit the mark, because they knew to their core, maybe not Delacroix, but they knew to their core what they were painting. And pieces don't even, the biblical ones, those will inevitably make you think about God and records in the Word. But one of my favorite pieces that doesn't have that direct tie, I saw it in person, and I had been studying it in college, and then we went overseas, and I believe it was in Germany where we saw this piece, and it's called Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, and it's by Caspar David Friedrich. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's this breathtaking, I lost my breath when I saw it. And there's very few pieces that do that for me. And so it's this beautiful, stunning piece of this man standing on top of these cliffs or rocks, and it has such a stance. It's a confident stance, and out before him is this vastness of sea and fog, and it's stunning. And I was just looking it up, and somebody said it shows a man confronting the vastness of nature and ultimately God, because when you get to the core of nature and its design, you can only go back to the heavens, because that verse that you said, Heather, the firmament declares the glory of God, that the nature and the earth declare over and over and over again the glory of God. That's its purpose. So this piece is stunning, but that's just like a take on a piece that doesn't have that direct alignment with a record, but it still can bring you that peace and that stillness where you can allow yourself to see that.
So you referenced Psalm 19:1. Are there any other notable scriptures or records from the Word that you see art, that you see that mastery for your passion that inspires you?
Yeah. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 says that God has called us to glory and virtue. Mm-hmm. That word virtue in some translations is superior, excelling, excellence. That is the bottom line. There's no room for mediocrity. There's no room for coasting. There's no room for not solving problems, and there's no room for not learning to do everything that you have to do to get it right. Superior, excelling, excellence. If you have a picture and the hands don't look like hands because you don't know how to draw hands, that is going to be a distraction. That is, you cannot paper over your lack of ability and call it style. Mm-hmm. You've got to solve every problem. So that inspires me.
That's amazing.
Frustrates me a little bit.
I love that take, though. There's no room for mediocrity. That's a really good way to put it. I love the poetic verses in the Word, so I always find myself going back to Psalms. And in Psalms 104, 2 and 3, the Amplified Version, it says, "You are the one who covers yourself with light as with a garment, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain or a tent, who lays the beams of the upper room of his abode in the waters above the firmament, who makes the clouds his chariot, who walks on the wings of the wind." And I just think verses like that just leave you without words, because who can come up with that or replicate something like that without just repeating these verses? There's so much visual imagery in those poetic verses, and I find myself keep going back to them, and those would probably be some of my favorites.
There's a section of scripture in Exodus, and it's 35 through 37, and it has to deal. I got into down this rabbit hole in terms of the Ark of the Covenant and how they built it. I was just flabbergasted about how God gave such specific instructions on how to build it, what it was to be made out of, what was supposed to be on top of it, the materials it was made out of, X, Y, and Z. And it is a literal work of art. And as I was learning more about it, when they got into the information about the tabernacle, there's a very specific section of scripture in Exodus 35, verses 30 through 35, where God has filled these specific men with his spirit in order he makes within them a wise heart. And what that means is that God gave them the understanding and the wisdom and the knowledge to be able to do the work that they didn't know how to do previously, because he needed something done. And so he made within them these wise hearts so that they could then work with metals and wood and gemstones and fabrics and all of these things to accomplish these beautiful things that would lead people's attention back to God, to represent the fact that God was in their midst. And so in terms of, Clem, you talked about that excelling, like that super excelling, that there is no There is no option. You got to make it right. You got to do it right. And you'll get there if you keep going at it. And said for you, the fact that, it's like, how else but God? Right. How can you yourself make it on your own without replicating what God has already done? Right. Not replicating what God has done, but the imagery that he's shown us, we have the opportunity to imitate that imagery. And it's like God is the one who inspires that within us. God's given us these talents and these abilities, and it's our privilege and our opportunity to make our best use of them. Mm-hmm. You both have done work for the ministry that we're involved in. Clem, you mentioned the return of the 70 and how you spent how many weeks looking for a good model for the face of Jesus Christ?
Well, in general, I was looking for faces for everybody. It took about a year.
When we're spending so much time working on these projects, and even Sydney has mentioned previously about how the desire to keep God involved. Sometimes you have to be very specific, like guide my hand. Have you seen things like that in your work where it has taken God to make it move, to keep it moving forward?
This picture we keep talking about, the return of the 70,
yeah,
it's 10 feet wide, 4.5 feet tall.
Jeez.
When I pitched it, they asked me how big I envisioned it, and I pointed to a window across the room, and I said that size. And then I measured it. It was 10 feet wide and 4.5 feet tall. Which is fine, except I don't have any place to paint something that large, not even half that large. So I talked with a pal, and I mentioned I'd contracted to do this 10-foot picture, and anybody know any studio space I could rent. He mentioned a friend to me. I called him up. He showed me his studio and said, "You can have this if you want.
Oh, wow.
As long as you want it." I'm still working there now. The place is huge. It has marvelous light. And then the other problem with the 10-foot pictures, what kind of an easel can hold anything that large? He had a $6,000 easel, and they're designed for huge paintings. It's got counterweights, so if I want to move it, I just touch it. I asked him, what can I give you per month on this thing? He was just grateful there was somebody there in the studio working.
Wow.
So there was that. And then there was one other thing. In the picture, there are a bunch of people. One guy at the center of the picture is leaning over and whispering to his friend. It was a horrible face. I couldn't make it better. I tried and tried. I just didn't like it. And the picture was going to be picked up in 4 days. And I just thought, I can't live with this thing. So with oil paint, you can't just paint over it, if you will, because oil paint gets transparent with decades. If I painted over it, you'd see the original. It would strike through. So I got out my pocket knife and I scraped it down to the nubs, just took away his face. So now I've got an interesting problem. In 4 days, they're coming to take this thing, and I don't have a face for this guy. There was a knock on the door. It was one of my drawing students. She came with her husband to see the picture. And her husband walks in. Perfect. He's the guy in the picture. He's the only one in the picture who was not a Middle Eastern man. So, okay, 2 miracles. That cases like that.
That's really cool. That's a whole nother facet of the art world that we're talking about. When we're talking about paintings, I'm not even thinking of the preparation and the rooms and all this sort of stuff, but those are all of the things that you have to integrate and to work together to make it happen, and to see God in even the most minute of those. As soon as you started talking about the studio space, I was like, oh yeah, where are you going to paint a 10-foot picture? But God was like, I got you. Don't worry. And the blessing of somebody, the fact that person was just excited to have somebody utilizing the space they had built, and having the tools that you needed in order for you to accomplish. That's awesome.
God
Yeah.
is so timely. He just comes through every time.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I'd never attempted anything on that scale before, but I have to say I planned for it well. One of the people I learned from is Norman Rockwell. He produced a great deal of work, whether you like it or not. I love him.
I love how controversial he is. People love or hate him. It's one of the two.
Yeah, he's quoted saying he thinks of his studio as a factory and the product he manufactures as corn. But he, among other things, he was very fast. And one of the reasons he was able to be that fast was he had the whole thing planned out. It was very, very well thought through. So getting 2 years to do anything is going to change the way you approach it. And this was a chance to, the record is in Luke 10, read it sometime. He sent out 70 people to preach. And they came back and they'd found they could do pretty much everything they'd seen Jesus do. So this was a picture of Jesus Christ debriefing these guys, and he's just listening. And it was a chance to show a kind of symphony of reactions. Some people are laughing because the story that's being told is pretty funny. Some people are introspective. One guy's leaning over and whispering to his friend. And there's only one person in the whole picture is looking at Jesus Christ. This was a chance to tell a story. And you don't often get a chance to do something and spend 2 years on it. It was an incredible privilege to do. One thing that breaks the spell, so to speak, one thing that distracts is lack of drawing. If there's something in a picture, and if you're working non-objectively, then you don't have to worry about that. But if you're doing pictures of visible things, particularly of people, anything that is done incompetently is going to break the spell. You're going to lose your connection with the viewer. So you need to become an expert on every aspect of that. Having 2 years to work on this thing gave me the chance to do that. It's not perfect, but it's the best thing I've ever had a chance to do. I'm very grateful I got to.
Yeah, you stand in front of it and you're just in awe. I was so thankful for the time that I got to look at that painting because I got to help with the frame of it for a little bit. So I was so thankful that I got to just look as close as I could to it. It's amazing.
The frame's the best part.
Yes. Shout out David Ray.
David Ray has work that's hanging that's in the White House, I've heard.
Yes.
He is very, very good.
Well, and it all works together. And that's the cool thing is it's not just the art, but it's also the presentation of the art too.
Did you ever read The World According to Garp?
Yes.
John Irving, very good writer. Yeah. He made a statement that I've always loved. He said that your reader has to know at all times that he's in the hands of an absolute expert.
Mm-hmm.
At least an expert on the story that he's telling. That's, if you're trying to do any kind of narrative painting, that's the vibe you have to go after. There cannot be any weak link in the chain.
What I really appreciate about this conversation is the exacting science that is actually behind it. Sometimes people think of art as just throwing paint and seeing what sticks. And for some people that is. For you guys, that is definitely not the case. The amount of planning and preparation and love that's getting put into the things that you guys do this is really cool. I'm really enjoying it.
There's another aspect, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're talking about illustrating scripture, not all records in the Bible are particularly visual.
Yes.
Some are not. The Return of the 70 is a very, very visual record. The shipwreck in Acts 27 is a very visual record. I don't know if you could make much of a picture of God showing the Apostle Paul the great mystery. It's not terribly visual.
Good thing it had it written down for us.
But you ought to consider that, what will work visually and what won't. Mm-hmm. One of the things that people get into trouble on is they tell you they have some great idea for a picture, but it's not visual. You can't turn a non-visual idea into a visual one. There is a record in Joshua chapter 10 in which 5 kings have just been defeated by Joshua and his men. And Joshua has the leaders of the army put their feet on their necks. Well, obviously, if you're going to put your feet on someone's neck, that neck needs to be on the ground. These guys were kneeling down, and the head of the army are putting their feet on their necks. That is very visual. Joshua is to the Old Testament what Ephesians is to the New Testament. And I did a picture of that years ago. I'd like to do it again because I'm a little better now than I was then. But Ephesians tells us that all things are under our feet. This Joshua record is visual. It is a very tangible way of recognizing that reality.
In terms of the work that you have produced, like Clem, you talked about the 70, the return of the 70. What about you, Sydney? Have you done some things that you would like to talk about?
Sure. I guess it was not necessarily one piece, but a project is the fitness facility mural that I was asked to do pretty soon after I started working for this ministry. And it took a little, I would say about a year, if not a little over, give or take. And that is just a collective amount of different figures in the gym doing different activities. And I don't even know how many panels of 4x8 panels are on the wall that contain maybe 10 figures around that. And it's pretty hefty project because you have to walk through the entire gym to see the whole thing. But there's so many things that I realized after I finished painting it. So the design that I came up for it was the progression of when you're in the gym and how you're preparing. So it begins with this figure wrapping his hands with red tape. And then it goes into this figure stretching with a resistance band. And then it goes into all these different exercises. And then throughout the whole thing, there's this flowing like red ribbon that connects everybody. And that's how it ends too. There's no figure at the end. It's just some mirrors. And then you see the ribbon just tie end. And I didn't realize until I was maybe midway through painting it. I was like, oh, that's the red thread. And so there were so many things that you don't even know that you realize that are within what you're painting that are from God.
But that's not all that's in that mural. I've seen this mural.
Yes.
I can enjoy it a couple times, a week. Yes. There's also something else in there that I thought was pretty snazzy.
Are you talking about the lion?
Yes.
There's
yes, flat out. Yes.
There's a half face of a lion. It's the left side of a face of a lion, and his mane is just continuing to the panels next to his face. And then on the right side, it says bold as a lion, which is the scripture reference. Proverbs 28:1. That is on the right side.
The King James version of Proverbs 28:1 says, "The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion."
Thank you, Heather. Yes, that is on the right side of the lion's face. And the words kind of finish the right side of the face. So there's that obvious separation from the left side of the face and the words. But I thought it was really interesting after I finished painting the whole thing because the lion is seen from almost every point of the gym, and it's the central area of the gym. So I thought that was an interesting thing that kind of happened because when I thought about putting a lion in there, I was wondering if it would fit. And then because all the rest are figures. And so once I finished it, it was almost like as if the lion completed the whole aspect of the red thread and what we all should be, because how Jesus Christ is referenced as a lion, and then how we should all be bold, and the righteous are as bold as a lion. So I thought that was an interesting takeaway that I didn't think about as I was painting the mural, as I'm thinking about, okay, I need to make this look like I know what I'm doing, essentially.
You accomplished what you wanted.
I didn't even know how to paint murals until a few months before I moved here. And that was because I'd moved back home since leaving grad school, which was already the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. And then I learned how to do that from a professional muralist. And then I come here, and one of my bosses is Michael Moore, who had done murals the year or two before. And so I'd already just been set up perfectly, and I didn't even realize it. And I remember somebody coming down to talk to me as I was painting the mural. And she told me, she said, "It's not a coincidence that you're here right now." And that was all that I needed to hear to keep me grounded. That was probably the biggest project that I've ever done. But
You did it with style.
So, and I do want to say thank you to Clem Robbins and to Michael Moore. There's so many people that you can thank for even like getting you this far, but Clem and Michael have been such inspirations to me. I feel like I've known both Clem and Michael my whole life, and I've always thought of them as these people that I can just gain all this knowledge from, and I have it at my fingertips, so why not take advantage of that? And so, yeah, thanks, Clem. Thanks, Michael.
Well, thank you, Clem. And thank you, Sydney, for taking the time to talk with us today and, to give us this viewpoint on what it means to be, an artist for God, about pursuing your passion as a profession, not just as something flippant to do, but as something serious that you're pouring your life into to be able to pour into other people. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm thankful for you guys, and I'm excited to see what's on the horizon, what's coming down the pipeline in terms of your work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Well, that certainly was a fantastic conversation. Wouldn't you agree, Sierra?
Definitely. I loved what Clem, Sydney, and Heather had to share with us. Thank you so much for sharing your hearts, sharing the word, and letting us have a glimpse into how art has impacted your life in a godly way.
Yes, it certainly was a great conversation, and I really appreciated a lot of the points that both the artists and the moderator had to share with us, including the incident with Clem and him trying to find a job as an artist and him sticking to what he felt was the right thing to do, and then God taking care of him in that situation where he was able to get a job that has fulfilled him, working for DC Comics for years and years and years now. So it's a really cool example of sticking to what God has desired for him to do.
Definitely. And I also loved learning more about Sydney and the experiences she's had in life. And you can see how God has just had her set up for success, one step after the other, from working with a mentor making murals in the Fort Wayne area to being able to help make a beautiful mural that we get to enjoy, at the Way International headquarters. And for our listeners, if you would like to see the artwork that Clem and Sydney talk about, Clem with the art on the Return of the 70 and the lion that Sydney talks about, we have a couple of links in the show notes to our bookstore where you can see the print for the Return of the 70 and perhaps purchase a copy if you'd like. We also have a yearly theme that we do each year in our ministry. And starting in October, we're going to have a new theme, and there is some cool artwork with it. And I'll just say that there is a lion that you get to see that looks a lot like the one that's in the fitness aisle. So if that's something that maybe you'd be interested in and perhaps purchasing or at least checking out some of what Sydney's done, we'll have links in the show notes to that as well.
Well, that's really exciting, and I think that will conclude this week's episode. Stick around for a preview of what's to come.
We let God's word shine in our life. He lights the path. What a show. That was God's word in conversation, nothing but the truth. A podcast backed up by biblical proof. And the show keeps rolling, can't miss the next edition. What's happening next? Turn it up and take a listen.
And then I realized, well, I was being critical. And that doesn't help anybody grow. So then I went back and realized, okay, this is what this person does well. Mm-hmm. This is what I know this person is challenged with, and I can help there. And let's go back and start all over. Mm-hmm. And then I start seeing progress. So then I realized that I was pushing rather than mentoring. And there's a big difference there. And love doesn't push, but it does bring you along. It does get you to go forward. And I realized I was pushing. And so once I stopped that, we've seen the change now.
Thanks for listening to Lighting the Way today. Join us next time as we discuss biblical topics, letting the Word of God light our way in life.